All right, so NiFi is compatible with both Windows and Linux. It's built on Java, right?
Yep, it's all Java.
It's all Java built. It can be deployed across multiple servers, and if it is, then it's a master-slave cluster environment. What that means is that the more computers you add to the mix, the faster it can ingest data. And what we found just in our first initial runs at it, that we were, how many records a second were we pulling through this thing?
We can definitely do 2,500.
Yeah, 2,500 records a second, and that's not just moving it, that's also transforming it in flight. So it's pretty cool. It's highly configurable. You can get into every single file that is a configuration file and make tweaks and modifications. It's open source, it's just kind of designed that way. The downside to that, of course, is that if you go in and you make the wrong tweak, you know, boom. So you have to be real careful as you do that. What else?
How many nodes was the 2,500 per second?
Oh, that's just a single.
I think you could just, well, there's a property on these processors, how many do you want to run at the same time?
Yeah.
So if you chuck it up to 15, you can get 15 of the same program running at the same time, and it just multi-threads.
But the 2,500 was with one node?
That was just with one node open.
Yeah, I think it's fast. It's fast.
Yeah,
We can show you.
Yeah, and we were moving JSON through it and transforming it into Hive, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Does anybody do big data in the room? Anybody use?
Or exploring and testing wise.
Anybody use Amazon Web Services on a regular basis?
Yeah.
A couple of our third parties do, so we're debating whether to build our new stuff with AWS or go with CenturyLink.
Okay, just checking to see.
Yeah, the last company I was at did big data.
Yeah, so this is actually, I mean, this is a great tool for big data, but it's also a great tool for just moving data around, right, within your company. A lot of times you'll write like a JCL job or something like that. What we found, because Carl comes from that world,
Yeah.
is that this is so much sleeker than using a JCL job.
Yeah, this is sort of like, if you're a mainframe programmer, you would get this, you would understand this software really. It would make good sense to you.
It looks less, it sounds less fiddly than SSIS. I don't know.
Well, I don't exactly know what that is.
A SQL
but-
server.
Oh, right,
SQL
right,
servers.
okay, gotcha. Yeah.
Or if you have a large FTP farm, like
Yeah.
say you're doing tons of FTP jobs, there's FTP processors, you could just wire them up and you could just do all sorts of nice things. with
I can't
that.
wait to bring this back to our mainframe developer and see what he thinks compared to
Yeah.
other stuff.
Well, so let's kind of dig just a little bit deeper into NiFi, since you kind of got our infrastructure. Does anyone have any questions about all that stuff?
Is Spark an alternative to NiFi, or what? Are there other related?
Spark is an in-memory processor for, let me think about this. We've looked at using Spark. We haven't had a real good reason to pivot to that at this point. Yeah, I'd have to think about that a little bit more before I can answer intelligently.
I was just wondering if you guys researched other alternatives to NiFi.
Yeah, so one of the other tools that we looked at within the Hadoop environment was like Flume. Flume is a tool that allows you to copy a database. It basically says, copy this database, stick it over here in HDFS, right? Without any bells and whistles and any of that kind of stuff. The reason we chose NiFi is because NiFi can copy that data and transform it all in flight and then stick it in the format that you want it to be in. So it sticks it, for us, it puts it in HBase, right? You could just as easily put it in HDFS as just a Hive file, right? Or you could take it and you could just stick it in a relational database.
Or we could put it in a Hive table, which kind of sits.
Yeah. So the benefit of NiFi is that you can pretty much take any kind of data, mess around with it, make modifications to it, and then put it in the form you need it in the end. Right. It's pretty powerful that way. And we certainly haven't, I mean, we have been playing with this, developing on it for a little over a year now.
Yeah.
And we're still like, whoa, that's so awesome. This is so new. This is amazing. So when we started out on NiFi, we were on version 0.6.
0.6.
Yeah, 0.6, which is not quite ready for prime time, right? But we did it anyway. And now it's on version 1.3. And it's changed quite a bit, mostly for the better.
Yeah.
There are some caveats, and Carl will cover some of those things, like scare moments, like if you delete something. If you delete a processor, there's no like Control-Z. It's just gone forever.
Yeah.
It's like, what have I done? All right, so the way NiFi works is you put it on a server, right? And then you go to like your local host. In this case, we're going to go to localhost, but in our Amazon version, you could type in the IP. And it takes you to a web-based interface. Right, so there's no like desktop front end or anything like that. It's all web-based. And basically what you have is, when you open it up, is you have kind of a components bar, a status bar, and a canvas. And the canvas, I mean, have any of you ever heard of spaghetti code? Welcome to spaghetti code. Because when you get a complex flow going, it can look like a plate of spaghetti, right? But it's powerful enough that it overcomes those limitations. So the way that it works is you take a processor, which is this little guy right here, you drag it onto the canvas, and it's just a generic processor, right, at that point. And then you select what kind of processor you want. Everything in NiFi is built on top of these processors that have all of these settings in them already. So for instance, if I want to connect to a queue, I just drag this thing over, and I select the right type of processor, and then I just enter the user ID and the password, and point to where the queue is, and the processor just is there. It does the work for me, right? So I don't have to write anything special to do that, and that's pretty much how NiFi is built.
Very similar experience to SSIS so far.
I'm sorry.
Very similar experience to integration services so far.
Yeah.
But the speed and capabilities you guys are getting out of it is much closer to what I need than what I have. So I'm looking.
Let's see. Oh, the other part is that there's 180 different processors that come packaged with NiFi. But if there's something that you need, you can just write it in Java or Groovy or Python and stick it on your server, and now you've got your home-built processor, right? And it's very powerful that way too. We've done some of that.
Yeah, we wrote a nice Groovy script that reads a JSON, which has an XML, and inside the XML there's a regular traditional flat file with sequential record layout, and we pick some data out of it. It's a classic.
So as the
little
file
chunk
is
of
going,
software
that's
there.
pretty cool, right?
Don't think I'll do that again. That's a one-time, once in your life experience.
So as the file's going through our system, we pick it apart, pull out relevant pieces of data, put them in a new variable, and send it on down the line. It's pretty neat. Let's see. So this is kind of what a processor looks like. There are components that are used to collect information from a variety of sources. You can pull from relational databases, queues, flat files, I mean pretty much anything you want to. And then you build it. It's not like you put one processor there and then you're done, right? You take this one, and this one says connect to the data and go get that first record, right? And then the next processor says pull that record into me and do this transformation. And then the next processor says log something cool that I want to see. And then another processor might say, write it to a relational database, right? And Carl's going to show you all this stuff. So, let's see. And that line is pretty neat, right? When you draw a processor and you pull another processor onto the map, the way that you connect those is you just drag a line like you're writing a Visio document. You just take a line.
Just like Visio. This is Visio with the data
It's like,
flowing through the line.
that was the quickest programming I ever did, right? You just drag a line from one processor to the next, and that's where your file is gonna flow, right? It just goes, oh, this is the next item in the sequence, and that's how it works. So that's called a connection. One of the other things that's kind of cool, let's make sure I don't get ahead of myself. Okay, so those pieces of data moving through the system are called flow files, right? And it contains the original data along with metadata about the data, right? So as it's moving through, you get to actually see, because every processor will add its own little piece to the metadata, right? You can actually see what's going on while things are happening in flight. So I can go in and I can say, what did the data look like on this side of the processor, and what does it look like on this other side of the processor? Did it transform it the way that I wanted it to, right? Which I think is probably one of my favorite parts. Like when you're doing troubleshooting, like in the old days, right? You look at the input and you look at the output, and I went, well, how did that go wrong? Right? And then you go through all these COBOL modules and try to figure out, you know, with NiFi, you just go, oh, I wonder what it looked like over here. Oh, this is where it fell down. It fell down in this processor. And then you can do what you need to do to adjust and make that processor a better processor. Yeah. So yeah, that single record is called a flow file, and it contains original data. And so this is where I bring Carl up, because he is going to show you an example of this on a working NiFi flow. So I'm going to get out of your way. Okay. And you'll have to switch to the next other HDMI.
All right, so
My floor, right?
Yeah.
I'm Carl. I've been working at Shelter for 18 years, and about the last 7 or 8 on the public website. So, where's your? Oh, it's not. So I'm familiar with the collecting customer information.
There we go.
So the new company that John was talking about, the Say Insurance, it's selling auto insurance directly to consumers. And something that the mutual company doesn't want to do because it competes with the agents. So, there. Let's get rid of this guy. Just going to get rid of some stuff here.
Yeah, he's cleaning out the queues just by right-clicking and saying, I don't want that data anymore.
Yeah. Well, I'll just get rid of this. Okay, so we have this, this, I guess you can see that. Oh, that's nice. Okay, so this is a flow here that we're going to rebuild, just to show you how you build these flows. Okay, so this flow, it has an invoke HTTP processor, which is going to call out to a website called random user, and it just generates,
Did you get connected to the net? Your network doesn't look like it's your Wi-Fi. Yeah.
It's Code Columbia guest.
Yeah.
Anyways, this random user generator creates JSON records with lots of people information in it. And where's my sublime? Let's show you what it looks like. Okay, so this is a JSON record right here. Are you guys? Are you all familiar with JSON? Yes. Okay, so JSON's pretty convenient. There's also XML data and there's CSV files, but JSON's pretty straightforward. So with JSON, you have JSON paths. So you can pick off some of the data elements that if you put the right JSON path in there, you can get the data out of there. And so this random website generate tons of these people files, and we're just using it as an example. Because like in real life, we have a policy administration system that cranks out JSON files that are full of the actual customers' data, their data entering on screens and stuff like that. So we get tons of JSON messages. We have like 100 different varieties of JSON messages. And that's why we use the big data database, because we just throw the messages in there basically untouched. And then we can use some fancy SQL statements in a thing called Hive, and it can read individual JSON elements and present them as columns to users, and it looks like SQL data. It's called schema on read.
Schema on read, yeah.
Schema on read, as opposed to figuring it out ahead of time how you want to store it in the database and having DBAs constantly try and get it all perfect, and then find out it wasn't very flexible. So this, we just have the raw data. Okay, so that's what that's all about. All right. So in NiFi, like John was saying, you have this thing here. You drag it down, and you filter. You type in some letters, and it'll narrow the list. So here's one called invoke HTTP. Now it does REST. They give you some tags there to help you, like topics. You can type this stuff. All right. This guy over here, I kind of loaded him up already. So it's got a property. I'm just going to copy that puppy. Cancel. Come over here and figure this guy. All right, it's going to do a get. It's going to hit that thing. It's going to get one result. I'm going to apply it. And then I want to see, just so we can see what's going on, I'm going to log it into the log4j file. And we're going to go look at the output of that so you guys can see it working.
Awesome programming.
Yeah, there you go. So you know what? You can get all these programs that are pre-built, and they do all these things, and you just have to wire them up, and you're ready to go. So there's a little warning here. Kind of tells you what you haven't done yet, and it's telling me that I need to do a little more configuration. So I'm going to go over here, and you have to kind of tell it that you don't care about these things if you don't care about them. Let's say.
Oh, you missed that one. It's up the top. No retry.
Okay, so red means it could start, and I can go ahead and start it. So it's loading up this queue. And this is really similar to an MQ or a rabbit queue. I mean, it's just like that kind of a queue. If I turn this whole thing off and turn it back on, that data is still going to be in that queue. It's got a really fancy way of keeping the data on the disk, and it's like guaranteed to not lose it. So it's really some high-tech computer science. You could read about it, but the NSA helps sort it out, and it's really good. So there's 175 records.
And they didn't put in a back door, right? So it goes right into their servers.
Oh, it
They
totally
wouldn't do
goes.
that.
They wouldn't
Come
do that.
It totally goes right into their servers.
If you remove that, that's 5,000 records.
Every record you send through, that's where it lands.
Yeah. So you can put a little clue here in this property here, this log prefix. So when I go and look in the log, I can search for this phrase, and it'll lead me to where my debug, my dump is right there. And there's a log payload here. So like John was saying, there's There's the attribute data, which kind of sits right next to the flow file content itself. So you got your payload, and you got your attribute data. And so a lot of the NiFi stuff is taking little bits of information out of the, like say that JSON file, taking something and calling it the key value and making it an attribute value. And then using that later on in another processor. So you kind of, it's sort of like session data on a website. You know, after you go past this one page in your session is, you know, we've kept what you answered on the first page, and now we're going to combine it with the second page's stuff that you data entered. So that stuff is session data, that's attribute data. This thing is very similar. You can keep adding stuff to your attribute data as you go through these flows. And you can take the attribute data and make it the flow file content data and back and forth. You can duplicate the messages, you know, and then they're out there twice, and you can send them down parallel flows. All the possibilities are there, and that's what kind of makes it so interesting, is that you can just go on and on.
Yeah, and you can have evaluation processors as well that will say, hey, this is this type of information, this is another type of information, so you go this way and you go that way, and then you can process them differently.
Yeah.
And we do that all the time.
So I've got my...
So does it have like some sort of sensible default way that it, you know, like you just took JSON data and output it to log4j, so those are very different structurally.
Yeah.
And it has some way that it just by default does all of these different connectors that probably aren't what you want, but I mean, like you can just connect like almost any two things and it will work in some way.
You know, there are places where, like, if you're trying to go from JSON to CSV, you have to go through a convert processor.
Okay, so you do have, there are some that you just have to
And they call
define
them
because.
convert.
Yeah, it just doesn't do it automatically.
Okay.
Yeah.
You have to help it.
Yeah, and he'll show you how to do that.
So there's a
when we
way
get
to
to the convert
configure
processor.
And if
how
I say,
the input format is going to look, and it should expect, and what the output format
Right.
should be when
Yeah.
it goes out.
That's correct. And you'll
Right.
see the convert processor.
Okay.
He's got one up here.
All
so
right.
there you got, so Avro is a really generic schema. So you can go to Avro, and Avro can support image data. And so you can really load up your record with images and foreign words, like say you want to put Arabic in your data. Avro totally supports it. You can put it in your database, and this Avro thing won't stumble at all. It's totally multilingual in that regard. So you got these different ones here. These are get or done ones, these ones that go from something to something. And this guy right here is really generic, since you're asking. This one is really cool. I'm just going to dive into it for a second.
Okay.
It has a record reader, which you can choose, create a new service, and you can choose an Avro reader, a CSV reader, a Grok reader, which is something to do with reading log files. Like if you were trying to process log files, this thing would be a great way to gather log files from many servers onto one server, and then hand it off to something that can digest those log files more fully. Or maybe this guy does that. There's a path reader. And tree readers kind of like is a good one. Then you can write a script in this guy and tuck it away in there. Just saying. And then on this side, so once it gets into in between those two types of, so you read it into this generic format, and then you can turn around and write it. And so you can go from any one to anyone. And the schemas that kind of sit behind these Avro things, you can force it to conform to things, and you can add fields that are missing. And then later on in your flow, you can pop in the missing elements before you give it to a database. And you can force that JSON structure to perfectly match your SQL database table 100%, so that it just goes through that put SQL processor down the road without a hitch. It does that. If those are the kind of data processing problems you have, this thing will cover it pretty good, you know. And if you don't have anything else in play, you'd want to give this a good try because it's free. So.
When you guys talk about that you have a mainframe, do you, like, what does that mean to you?
Well, we don't take advantage of the mainframe with this particular software, except to FTP a file over to it, because that's the kind of traditional input they're
We have some state
expecting.
reporting that we have to do, and we just take that file and stick it out, FTP it over to the mainframe.
Do you guys use AS400s there?
No,
Yeah,
no,
That's
I think
way
they
too small.
bought some insurance company in Georgia that has an AS400.
Do we? Okay, yeah.
But you really do mean bigger mainframe stuff.
Yeah,
It's
it's
not
a big,
big.
yeah,
We
it's
have
a
like
big.
this-
It's a big iron.
The
Yeah.
second smallest mainframe that they offer.
But what we've
We're
done
proud of
is
that.
we've actually put this, our NiFi is on the equivalent of a small PC. It's not even,
The Amazon is
Yeah.
super, it costs us about 45 cents an hour to run our NiFi on the, I don't remember that diagram. The
Yeah.
one NiFi was 45 cents an hour, the other one's probably 55 cents an hour. So you're basically running these servers with this for almost nothing. I mean,
How does it handle?
$15,000 a year, we're doing this whole thing for $15,000 a year. And I still am working part-time on the public website. I don't even do this full-time. It's not even that hard.
Yeah, I don't work on it full-time either.
Are there any security issues with working with Amazon Web Services?
Yeah, you know, we live in a little bubble. So our IP addresses are perfect. You can't break into us, and we can't get out. We can't use the random user API from inside our Amazon bubble. We can't get out and nobody can get in. It's pretty tight. I mean,
yeah.
you can't upgrade your Linux software with the Yum. Anybody do that? Anybody use Linux, the Yum?
Yeah.
You can't do that. We can't get out to bring that in. So, but you really don't need to. When you use the Amazon, you just choose what you want, and they have these pre-configured Linux servers, and you just say, I want this, and literally have radio checkboxes. I want this software, and they just put it all on there, and it's already compatible. You don't even have to fuss with it. It just, if it's not compatible, you write a ticket, and they fix it or tell you what you need to do to make it. It's pretty, and the tickets are like free as far as I know. I don't have to charge for the ticket.
We have $1,200 a year for support.
Yeah.
So
For-
almost free.
So for it to handle, so since it handles like document-based things like JSON, where it needs to get the whole record to do really anything
Yeah.
to it, what if that whole record is huge, you know? Like, so
We
do you run into those?
We ran into that.
So it's basically memory limitations, is it like
We,
DOM parsing versus SAX parsing?
We had records, and we thought, 64K or 65K was enough for our records. And it turns out some JSON records were in the 80K area. So we went out to the NiFi properties, which is like in the
It's
configuration
just a big
folder,
text file.
and I raised the size of the flow file to 192K for the max. Solved that problem. And it really didn't lose the records. They just kind of went to the failure loop. You can have failure loops on these things.
Yeah.
It's if you were doing images, you'd probably crank up that attribute and flow file size up to the 2 or 3 megabytes, and then you would say, you would tell this thing, I want it to use 15 megabytes of main memory, or 20 megabytes, and it actually does that. According to the people on the NiFi forum, you can just use up an entire machine, and it doesn't bother it at all. Apparently, it's cool with that. It's cool with images, like if you were sending X-ray files through it. I mean, if you're the
I thought you were gonna say
NSA,
X-rated.
yeah, maybe X-rated too. If you're the NSA and you're getting
That's a
satellite
different
images,
meetup, that's on Thursdays.
Exactly.
Tell your wife about it. Where is that record?
Good recovery there, buddy.
That's
Yeah.
You can tell what my mind is.
I bet the people that work at that NSA see so much stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So this software, right, if they're gonna get satellite images and text messages, this thing is flexible. It doesn't have any big, issues like that. So I just chucked out 175 records into the log here. And you can kind of see, like, here's a typical one. There's my little tag right there, that little, that I put in my logger. And you can see the time, there's all these standard, tags that you get without doing anything extra. And then here's the payload down here. This is the JSON message. And cranked out 175 of them. Now I didn't actually lose those records because I just sent them on to the next step, which is just passed them on through.
And they'll just sit in the queue forever until you put another processor on there and say, do something with this information.
Yeah. And I'm just going to, for the sake of time here, I'm just going to copy this.
Do you ever have problems with the files getting big and using up your disk quota inside?
We had that problem. We thought we were configuring our EC2, which is our Linux server, with 32 megabytes of, or 32 gigabytes of hard drive.
Yeah.
But we really only had 8 gigabytes. And we were running this software for like 8 or 9 months. And one day we ran out of space. And we kept thinking, well, we have 80 gigabytes, because we just didn't count the zeros. We only had 8 gigabytes. It's like, dang,
So is running this on a machine with only 8 gigabytes of memory.
For the longest time.
Yeah, forever.
And then we realized our mistake. And so we did run it out of space one day. And but it was,
You just have to be careful not to let it back up.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Especially if you have a lot of big files with images and things like that, because they can take up a lot of space.
Yeah, you have to be careful.
But mostly what we do is we just pass it through, right? We don't even keep, I'll talk a little bit about, I told you earlier about the fact that you can kind of have a before and after snapshot. We actually have ours turned off, right? So we can't actually see that before and after because we don't really care. And it removes the need for the disk space of keeping all that extra information.
Yeah.
So it's called provenance.
Yeah.
And,
So there's a key field down here called info and seed. This kind of just, that's in this JSON file here. In this processor it's called the evaluate JSON path processor. I'm going to I put that path in there, this thing right here, that's a JSON path. It's going to take that piece of data and put it in an attribute variable named seed. And the destination of this little thing here is the flow file attribute as opposed to replacing the content of the flow file. So you can just toggle this. You can go either way, but today I'm just going to make it an attribute. And put that on there, and then we're going to log that property. And I just want to show you that's, maybe it's
one of the things that we were just talking about is how when we had those errors with the really big files. What we did is we just created like a loop and said, hey, if this thing is bigger than this, go stick it in this queue over here and just leave it there, and then send us an email. Let us know it's there so we can see what's going on with it, and it just stays there until we decide we're going to fix it.
The first time I ran one of these, that log attribute processor, I left this run schedule at 0 seconds, which is like fast, at full speed. But here, if I just do like 1 every 10 seconds, then it's just going to slowly poke these things through here. If you wait long enough, you'll see another one go through. Oh, here goes another one. So you got, all these processors have schedulers on them.
Yeah. So if your output source is being overrun with data, you can basically just say, hey, just don't put it in quite as fast.
Yeah.
Slow it down.
And you can do some sort of adaptive thing, maybe speed it up, slow it down automatically, or
Yep, there are waiters, there's weight ones out there, there's control rate. And you can tell it, this guy right here, I've used it before, because when you're debugging things, and you don't want to just like constantly have to start the flow from the top again, it's great to pause things and slow them down. And then you can kind of, this one says the maximum rate, you put in like, you read the help. 1 megabyte. Time duration. Anyways, you can use this thing to slow things down. You can see data rate, slow file count. It works. I've used it. Okay, so we evaluated the JSON path. This guy. Now, if I was doing this in real life, after I got done building my flow, I would cut out all these flow file things. I'd just go like that. I'd stop this guy up here. He's already stopped, and I'd stop this guy. And if I knew everything was working fine, I would just take this guy, and this is like real live data, right? And I would just, I'm ready to go. And I've done this in production. I mean, you know, you just, it's sort of like you're a network admin. At the same time, you're being a programmer, and it's perfectly okay to do that. That's just the way it works. Okay, so this one over here is.
So if you broke something, how would you go about backing that out? Do you have a way of retracing what you just did?
No, there's no Control Z. So if you fat finger it, it's gone. Now there is a folder in the background that takes like a total copy of the entire canvas and backs it up once every 1 second or 5 seconds. You can set that number.
Can you manually?
Is there a way
So you
to
can manually go. You can
save
restore
it
your
and
flow
snap
file,
when
your
you
canvas.
canvas?
Yeah.
So take a snapshot of it before you make the change in production.
Well, and it constantly is making that snapshot.
Can you drop back to a snapshot?
Yep, you can. You can say, and you can configure that folder to say, I want to hold 30 days worth of snapshots, and it'll take them once every 1 second or 5 seconds. And you just you can't tell exactly which is which, but you can see the date and timestamp on those, and you can pop it back in here. It's kind of clumsy. It's not real good in terms of the traditional software migration path. This is not that kind of software. This is more like super duper FTP data ingestion system. It puts it into a database, and
I will say that they're constantly modifying this software in the open source community, and that's one of the things that they've been talking about is the ability to version things and to make Control Z actually a thing. Like it works for every other software on the planet. Why not this one?
Is the job definition stored in a flat file or something somewhere? You have access to?
it's an XML file.
So you could check the XML file with something like Git
Oh yeah.
and start versioning
You sure
that.
can.
No, and we do that.
And you do that, okay.
Yeah. Like right now, I can just back out of here and click on this guy right here and say, I want to create a template. Call this DevComo template. And now this is that one chunk of software. This is it's called a process group. Is now in a file. And I can export it. It's the top one here, and I'm just going to save it out to disk. And I can send this in an email, and you can import it in your NiFi. And that's how John and I were passing this other template around. This one right here. This is what I plan to build at the meeting.
Yep.
And he was experimenting with it just to make sure we had our ducks in a row.
So it's the XML file.
But that's just a snippet of that canvas. That's just one portion of it.
Okay. But is it human readable enough that if you didn't want to use the GUI, you could just use an XML editing
Yeah.
tool and create your own.
You'd be awesome.
So these are process groups, okay, so these are all the flow file, these are all process groups I have on this canvas here. Each one of these is,
If you double click on it, it goes into the actual template, so.
yeah,
So it's kind of nice that they can,
this one right here is,
Kind of like putting them in a file.
OAuth 2, you guys ever try OAuth 2? It's a fancy security thing. Anybody try
I'm
OAuth?
thinking about it, haven't had a print.
So here's a flow file, a flow thing that actually does that. Somebody wrote it up and you could actually debug this thing and it would work, according to the NiFi guys on the forum.
There's so many of these
And-
templates out there that are.
Right, you
people
download
develop.
the templates and you play
They
with
put them
them.
out there for you to experiment with. It's pretty cool.
So I have an HTML test, you can build up an email with, and you can make your email look pretty by poking in the magic answers you have an HTML like template, it's just an HTML file, and you use like replace text, and you poke in the values, and you get your style sheet guy to put in some cool colors, and he comes out looking really nice, and we're gonna impress the executives with some really cool emails down the road here. We have plans.
Yes, we do.
We have plans.
So,
Cool.
Okay, so we're gonna convert a record here. So then back to this convert record thing. So I got a JSON path reader. And these are controller services. So the processors, some of the way the software is kind of evolving is that processors can have controller services, which are like shared things, and there's one called JSON Path Reader. Whenever I go to HBase, I use the HBase client things. When I do DB2, there's ones in here for DB2. When we do AWS stuff, there's some AWS things. But I go to this JSON Path Reader. It says use the Avro schema registry and use this schema name in that registry. If I click on that guy, it's going to take me up to this one here. And inside there you could have a whole list of schemas. And these can match your DB2 tables. That's typically what you do, or whatever table you want. And then that right there is a Avro schema. And there's an Avro schema website up here. And so you can double check to make sure your Avro schema is laid out nicely. You just press this button. And if there's an error, it shows up on the right side. If it looks good, you don't have to worry about it. Then there's a JSON path added there too. Like if you're unsure about how to get to those JSON things, you just pop it in here. And then if I put in like $info, see, click this button. Oops. Whatever JSON path you're trying to debug, you just go up here and that's the magic value that's in that thing right there.
yeah, so it does take a little configuration to do
Yeah.
these transformations.
You gotta be, anyway, so I got this schema going here. Now I'm gonna start it. That's what the enable button is. And they're trying to make this section of the GUI easier to use. I know that. This guy's ready to go. And
Yeah, if you try to start it without those operating, it'll tell you. It'll say, oh, these aren't running. It's like, well, why don't you just start them up?
so my JSON path reader is gonna take these JSON paths on this value section and make.
Pointing at your screen
Doesn't help. It's gonna take these guys. I'm not the Toastmaster expert. In fact, I've never gone to Toastmasters.
We can correct that.
You're right. Yeah, those are JSON paths, and these are the Those things are in the schema, all right?
Yeah,
Just to know
those are
that
your outputs.
It
yeah.
does work. And then on the output side, we have the CSV writer, and it's going to use the same schema. And it's just going to flatten this JSON into a CSV file.
Yep.
Because we're just having fun here today, so. And do I have any warnings? Let me go ahead.
You've mentioned this Avro, what is that again?
Avro is like some kind of common denominator.
Some data
it's kinda
structural
like a-
standard?
Yeah, it's sort of like a
Okay.
generic schema thing, like you have.
Kind of the
IBM
WC3 of
Okay.
schemas, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
So this is what a company
Or like
should look
JSON
like,
for
and this is
It's
what
an
a...
Apache approved standard for schemas.
Oh, okay.
And it just is a get or done schema thing that it's not, I don't have a failure, so if I have a failure and if I have a mistake, it'll chuck data into this failure queue. I don't think I have anything. This thing, I'm just gonna configure this guy.
So how obscure are they getting with these interfaces? And can you get to like Google Drive or Salesforce?
Oh, you can pull a lot, I mean, yeah.
There's
So
a
it was
Google
like
processor.
100 and-
Yeah.
There's a Google, you can
So
actually.
you can connect to
manipulate-
Twitter and pull data straight out of Twitter or Facebook or, I mean,
Yeah.
it's almost any kind of social media, any kind of
Those
data
four,
structure, yeah.
those four processors right there, you can list the Google bucket. So S3 is like a folder system, just like you have on Windows. It's just it's in the cloud. It's an Amazon thing. But Google has their competing thing here. It's called Bucket, the GC bucket. And you can put things into the bucket, you can fetch them, list them, and you can delete them. So the list thing, all the list processors have like high water marks. So like it knows when something new arrived. And you can set them to perpetually look for something new and instantly, notify you. Or you can say, I want to cron this processor and run it every hour or 2 hours or every day or once a week and go get the new things that have shown up since the last time it was invoked. And so they all the list processors keep a high water mark, and
Yeah, so they know what you've already ingested, and they're not gonna re-ingest it again. Now, you can tell it to forget everything and re-ingest everything as well, so.
One of our first hard lessons with big data like this
Yeah.
is we're used to live databases where you can edit records, and in this environment, you assume a record is never edited. And if it's edited, the way to edit is to delete and replace.
Mhm.
And then that'll trigger it to load again. But there's no way you can even think of going back to find a change record, it's only new ones.
right, in big data, you just continue to add to the database, and then your SQL filters out the old ones.
Yep.
And HBase does that really well. It's like pure magic. But you just keep piling it in. You never go backwards, you never take it out. The SQL statements just don't see them. They just get the last one. And it takes, our SQL statements are like 100, 200 lines long with left join after left join after left join. They're like little programs themselves.
Oh, yeah.
And you build them up. But once you got them going and the Tableau system runs them and the Tableau server presents the data, and it's like, Tableau is like a Excel on steroids. It really is everything you wanted in Excel and didn't get.
So you just take this data and feed it into this Tableau to do all of your analysis.
To do the visualizations.
And the
Yeah.
visualizations.
And it can-
And that's not open source, what is that?
No, Tableau is about $400 a seat.
That's where we spend our money.
Yeah.
We're not happy about that, but that's the way it is. It's expensive. But there's geographic information in our messages, and actually, it creates dots on these maps, and we can see where the policies are being bought, and it groups the dots together, and it changes.
But that's a different meeting, right?
That's a different meeting.
So can this thing basically screen scrape, say, a website and extract the data out of that.
Yeah, yeah. There's templates out there to.
Although in retrospect, since this is from the NSA, that would be like.
Of course.
Yeah, that's the first one.
That's the first one to do, right? So if I were to like point this at something like CaseNet and screen scrape all the people's criminal histories that have ever come up, I can put that into something.
Public information.
Yes, public information.
I created CaseNet, I can
right?
tell you that's okay.
If you have REST APIs, like at work, we have these systems where you do a CSA request and you get a CSA response. And you can do that REST API with this software, no problem. They have Twitter, they have flows where they look for Twitter tweets and they filter them all for certain terms. And then they route them down a flow.
Huh.
If the attribute matches, it's called route attribute. You can send it and branch it off this way and that. I mean, there's like,
Throw the rest in the
there's
bucket.
hundreds of templates out there for all sorts of things. The HTTP is just another way to get data in and out of the system. There's nothing special about it. Once it gets in, it's a flow file just like this one. It has a payload. There's our CSV file right there. And there's that seed value I was telling you about. I plucked that one value out of there, of the JSON. And then there's the 4 fields I converted into a CSV file. And
Yeah, and that's the flow file that follows it all the way to the end.
exactly. So
And these logs eventually disappear on a timeline, whatever you decide that timeline is.
yeah, it's a regular log4j. It has, it keeps, you can figure out how many days you want to keep it, like 30 to 60 days. It rolls every hour, just like you'd expect a regular. If you guys ever do a website and you have lots of logs and lots of servers, this is traditional log4j. You'll recognize the terms on there. Nothing special there.
Okay. I see you have this running on your local laptop now. Is that like a big WAR file that you've installed into, say, Tomcat or something like that? Or what is it that's bringing up?
It's even
just a
easier than
Java
that.
app.
It
It's
is.
just a double-clickable jar file, or what is this?
You just start the little server and it
It comes to me as a zip
It's
file.
a zip?
And I unzip it, right? And then
Yeah.
this is the baby
Your
here.
bin, yeah.
And you don't, when it first starts up, you don't have that many folders, but this is the guy that has the start commands.
Okay.
Pretty straightforward.
Download that.
That
click the
covers-
Start button.
That's the same as Linux and Windows. It does it all right there.
Okay.
And then you got your configuration file. This one right here is,
That's a little, yeah, you use that a lot.
So you got a properties file for some configuration.
I don't know what that's trying to tell me.
Okay.
There's your,
Typical config file, yeah.
Yep.
yeah. There are some, some places that you get used to editing in here. When you upgrade from one version to the next, you have to use like beyond compare, poke in the lines that you want from your old property file and put them in the new one. But
Are there any companies, that are using this behind some SaaS or some service, doing anything cool with it like that?
Not that I'm aware of. I know the NSA uses it.
and it's okay, so Hortonworks kind of
Zapier doesn't use this under the hood.
we were
He's not
gonna
saying.
We were going to do big data in-house at first. So we were going to buy and set up our own Hadoop system. And Hortonworks has a prepackaged Hadoop. And they take the NiFi and they call it Hortonworks Data Flow.
Yep.
And they, for $60,000 a year in support costs, they'll make sure your in-house system is working great. And if you got a big budget, that's the way to go. But it costs a lot to buy good, high-quality software.
Yeah, it was gonna cost us about $250,000 to set it all up.
Yeah.
And with this solution, it costs us less than $25,000.
Yeah, you can do the AWS thing and you get the same stuff. Plus you get to try out the Hadoop and see if you like it. And it doesn't cost you that much.
You also have to don't worry about facilities insurance. So if you have something happen to your office where you've got all your servers, you get a big headache.
Exactly. We have to do disaster recovery at work, and it all has to be able to pick it up and restore it in Colorado. That's our current offsite place.
And
it changes by the
our role
year.
in that is that we watch everybody else do it while we go, ours is all out in AWS.
You just take
Disaster
that out.
recovery.
The data's on S3, which is their super backed up, folder system. It's supposed to already be cloned 19 times. You might not be able to read it for a couple seconds while they go through a backup, but it's supposed to always be there. They tell us.
Would you use NiFi for any kind of aggregation?
There's a merge processor. There is a merge processor. There's a compressor too. There's compressors. I've made zip files out of everything. And then I pack them, and then I unpack them. And you can do zip files as zip files. You can really squeeze them down. And you have less things to FTP.
Yeah, originally, we stored all of our stuff in S3 into zip files because it would take up less space. And then we undid that.
I really like this merge processor. This is one of my favorite programs. It's like I didn't have to write it, but it's all this functionality you get for free. So you can tell it that you want to wait. You can set up a bin key right here, this correlation attribute name. So you can give it some, like one of those attribute values, like this guy right here, say seed. And say I had duplicates out there, and I wanted to, it would create a bin for every unique value in that attribute name. And then I could say, how many bins what's my maximum number of bins? And I could crank it up to say 5,000, And then I could say, you can say the minimum number of entries in a bin, okay? So a bin, whatever is satisfied first, either the age of the bin or the number of entries that you consider as the bare minimum to make that bin complete before it kicks it out of the merge processor as a packed file, either a zip file or a concatenated file or what have you. But this thing is cool because you can say, I want to wait 5 minutes. That's 600 seconds or whatever. What is it? 300 seconds. I want to wait 300 seconds. Or when I get 2 files, whichever comes first, and it'll let that data come out of there, as a packed file. Anyway, you get a lot of functionality out of this thing.
Yeah, and like I said, we are still exploring the capabilities of this, even though we've been using it for a year. I feel like we know about 15%.
There's 180 processors in this thing, so like if I type in the word list, right, you get out this big list of, you got your Azure, database tables, FTP files, the bucket from Google. This is like an internal file system in Hadoop. There's the Amazon system. This is a different way to do FTPs. There's a bunch of listeners out here. If you guys use any of this stuff, I mean, that's the listers. And then you got your fetchers. If you list something, then you want to fetch it, right? You can fetch files. You can fetch all those things, or you might want to get them. There's a little subtle difference between fetchers and getters. You start to figure it out after a while. You might want to put them, right? So then you got all your footers. I mean, this thing is all about ingestion and sucking it in and getting it out. I mean, that's what it's all about. Okay.
Yeah.
Are we good?
I think so.
All right.
I think so.
Cool, thank you.
All right. Well, so.
So I know that we probably created more questions in your mind than we've actually answered, because this is a very powerful software. And I'm not going to display this back up to the screen, but I did have a few closing notes that we may have talked about, a few of them.
One of the best things that we found is this failure flow, right? If we run into a problem, instead of our job just exploding, right, then we get like an output that says, hey, your job exploded. It just takes that data and sticks it in a queue, right? And then we can deal with it later. And then we can put like a little processor on that that says, if something shows up in this queue, send us an email. So we'll know that this happened.
Put email, it's the third one down on that.
Yep. So that's very powerful. Data provenance, we kind of talked about it, but basically, in between any of these flows, you can see the before and after condition. And that's also very powerful. Alerting and emailing. Yeah, so I think Carl's wonderfully covered most of those kind of final ideas. Are there any other questions about, yeah?
In case you have, speaking of JSON, in case you have a nested JSON, or you don't know the structure of the structure of the JSON file, how does it handle those cases?
All right, so we actually run into this because all of our JSON has like these components, like we have a policy level, and then we have coverages, like you can have multiple coverages on a policy and multiple drivers and multiple. And what we had to do is we had to build a special, like a script that goes through and says, oh, dig down to the next level, and then we can pull that back up into something usable. So we developed our own.
Yeah. So like you're saying, JSON doesn't support ordered array things. So like the coverages come in. They might be the same set of coverages, but they're in different orders from one customer to the next.
Mm-hmm.
So to force them in the same order, you're going to have to go into like Groovy, and you're going to have to know. You're going to have a regular one-for-one. I want this coverage to go into this variable, and then kick that thing out in the same order every time. And we have those in our system.
Yeah. When you said you wrote your own code, what
did we write it in Groovy?
Yeah. Okay. So
did you have a place where you put your Groovy script in, and what do they look like?
It's really easy. It's if you do execute script, like this guy right here, and they also have execute string. So then you would go into this guy, and you would put in
Oh my goodness,
a file name. You could put in a file name here, and it could be sitting on your. So I'll write my scripts in Eclipse, actually. Get them all debugged. Then I kind of hand assemble them into a flat file, because it doesn't support multiple scripts very well. At least I haven't found it to. Anyways, I'll build up a nice script file on Windows if it works, and I'll upload it to the Amazon Linux box, and then it's ready to go. So you've got your different languages here. Ruby, Lua, Python, Ruby.
Yeah. You can pretty much build it in anything you want to, except for COBOL.
You're good
Come on.
Now, you can also write your own processor. Like, there's no reason you can't write your own processor in Java.
Yeah,
I actually wrote one just to prove it to myself. The way those Git commands work, it creates a fully functional blank processor with all, it's a Java program with all the imports you need, ready to run, and then you just go in and fill in the inside part of it.
Oh, so you have a template to start off with.
Yeah. The way those Git commands work, you can generate they got some name for it, but it generates the whole thing ready to go, and then you just upload it as a WAR file. Actually, it's called a NAR file, because they had to give it a different name. But it's portable, just like a WAR file. It's even more portable than a WAR file.
And you just have a directory up there where you drop
and you just add it to the folders, and you're ready to go. It's for, you really need a really high-powered problem to do that bit of hassle.
Yeah.
Because you're going to have to
More than
recompile
likely
that
someone's
thing every
already done it
time.
once.
Every time they upgrade the NiFi, you're going to have to recompile that puppy.
Yeah.
Oh.
And this thing, every 3 months they upgrade it. We're still like 1.4 is almost ready to come out the door with more SQL stuff. Like 1.4 is going to have more SQL processors a bunch more. So you can do inserts of 10,000 rows in one shot, you know, really lay into that database hard and.
Any other questions?
Real quick question, your
Yeah.
error catching, so when you put it off into a cache on the side,
Yeah.
does it keep flowing new data as it comes in? Or
Uh-huh.
does it stop every?
Sure does. No, it just keeps
It
going.
keeps going.
And does it stop just the batch or just the failed?
The failed ones would go into those fail loops, and you can set on those properties how many seconds you want it to wait before it resubmits.
Yeah.
It doesn't always work in every processor. Processors are not equal. Some are really well written, and some aren't.
Yeah, and you could even create a
Kind of
processor
varies.
that if you know of a failed condition, right, you can put a processor in place that says, fix this thing and throw it back into the queue, and then it'll just keep going.
Yeah, like when we had our flow file size problem, we just tested one of the attributes to see how big the flow file was, and if it was greater than a numeric value, there's an expression language you can use in the route attribute processor, and we just did a simple greater than, and then send it out the side, and just skimmed off all the bad guys, and we just put them into a folder and waited until we had a solution. Took 2 or 3 weeks to sort out, you know, get the solution figured out.
Yeah.
Then
But
we
the important thing there is that we didn't lose any data,
Yeah.
right? And that's the reason we really love this program. Yes?
Yeah, how does it recognize that you reached the end of file, and how does he recognize that you didn't rewrite like a row or something like that?
Well,
Have you really-
especially the way that we use it, we connect it to RabbitMQ, so if there's something in the queue, then it reads it, and if there's nothing in the queue, it just stays connected, and it's going, is there anything here? Is there anything here?
Yeah.
Right?
So like all these processors, when you first fire them up,
Yeah.
they have you do that configure on this right here. There's a failure, a merge, and an original. A lot of times there'll be a success on there, like on the log guy, you'll see a success. But if you don't terminate that, you know, those are the endpoints of the processor. So if you don't check that box, and you can't start it. See how it's turned yellow? So it makes you deal with those endpoints, whatever they are.
Anything else? I will stick around for a little bit if you just have anything you want to talk about, visit, that's cool. Otherwise, I think we're done.
Cool. Thanks a lot.